So about a month ago, I hit 1,000 subscribers, and because I don't know how to celebrate things like a normal person, I made a scavenger hunt. It turns out this scavenger hunt was much too difficult, although I appreciate everyone who attempted it, and I feel like I learned a lot about making puzzles from this experience. You know, in case I ever need that skill in the future. I guess you never know. If you're curious about the scavenger hunt, I have or I will soon post the clues and the solution in the description of this video. I bring this up though because I wanted to make something that could serve as a quote-unquote prize for the scavenger hunt, but wouldn't require me to put in too much additional effort since I had already put in that effort into making my too difficult scavenger hunt clues and puzzles. What I settled on is the following. You may or may not know that I wrote part of a Pathologic fanfiction last year when I was at the height of my Pathologic obsession. It's set after what I consider my favorite Pathologic ending, play as Daniil, choose to save the town. I wrote it to categorize my feelings about the game and the ambiguity of the game's endings, and to that end I wrote about 27,000 words in 2 weeks. And no, it's not done. Still not done. I don't even know if it's like a quarter of the way done. I've never been capable of writing concisely in my life. I know I'm biased here, but in revisiting it, I found it to be surprisingly good. So I decided to narrate the first couple of chapters as the quote-unquote prize for the scavenger hunt. Of course, since nobody solved the scavenger hunt, that meant that I had all of this pseudo-audiobook audio sitting around collecting virtual dust. I also think this pseudo-audiobook is surprisingly good, and I figured, why not make it into a full-fledged video? I haven't done one of those in a while. Certainly, why make a normal, boring old analysis video essay when you can do something much weirder that the algorithm is almost certainly not going to know what to do with. So, here you are, my friends. Here are the first chapters of my fanfiction. I have turned them into a full-fledged video in the style of a bad visual novel. Why a bad visual novel? Well, I needed some visuals to make it a full-fledged video, since this is a video, and my artistic skills are very mediocre. I hope you enjoy it. Please don't be too hard on me, especially on my highly mediocre digital art skills. Also, I feel like I don't need to say this, but I will. Since it's set after the ending of Pathologic Classic HD, you do need to be familiar with the game and its endings, though I summarize a lot of the relevant information at the beginning of the story. There are spoilers galore here, and any content warnings for Pathologic Classic HD probably apply here. Namely, please be aware that while nothing content warning-y happens in the text itself, there will be references to suicide, violence, and living through a plague. And if you would like to read the text of what is written of the fanfiction, again keeping in mind that it's unfinished, or follow along with the text, the link to the story will be posted in the description. With that unnecessarily long introduction out of the way, let's begin! After the Tower Falls. Chapter 1. A New Proposal. Daniil stands again at the end of the broken bridge, looking at the wreckage on the other side of the river. He knows that he should not. It is probably unhealthy for him to keep coming back here, and given that he is a bachelor of medicine, he should know such things. It certainly is not healthy to allow himself to be so close to the Crucible, where the livid Canes live. Given how well his last meeting with Maria Cana had gone in particular, she might very well strike him down, or at least push him into the river if she catches him here again. But Daniil cannot help himself. The debris cluttering the other bank and clogging part of the river itself are his fault, after all. Yet another part of this town that he failed to save. These are true ruins, ugly ruins, unlike the poetic staircases to heaven that the Smatin brothers built across the city. The polyhedron drew him inexorably in life, and even in its death, he cannot escape the macabre pull to its scattered remains. Oinon, you are here again. a friendly voice calls from over his shoulder. Daniil turns to see Artemi Barak striding up the road towards him. The man stops and folds his arms over his chest, flashing Daniil a casual smile that Daniil finds incredibly grating. Daniil does not particularly want to engage with the man, but he nevertheless reluctantly answers, "Hello, Barak." Daniil had spent 12 days in this cursed town desperately trying and mostly failing to stop a deadly plague from ravaging it completely. During that time, he had occasionally called upon Barak for help, but the man had mostly been aloof, focused on his own business. That had probably been a wise choice because, unlike Daniil, Artemi Barak had seen quite a bit of success in those 12 days. Not only had he managed to recreate Panacea, one of the only known cures for the sand pest bacteria, he had also solved and avenged his father's murder and taken over as foreman for the kin. These accomplishments have softened Barak, lending him an easiness and a confidence he had not possessed when Daniil had first met him. It almost seems ludicrous now that during those same 12 days, half the town had believed the friendly man standing next to him might be a serial killer. And though Daniil had barely been able to track the man down when he needed them during those days, now it feels that Daniil cannot escape him. Barak is everywhere now, always arranging some important matter or other on the behalf of the kin. By contrast, Daniil's 12 days of endless suffering have simply thrown him deeper into the well of bitter sarcasm and self-loathing, to the point now that he doubts there is any means of escape. As such, the amenable look on the larger man's face is now irritating, to the point of potentially infuriating. Barak glances between the rubble and Daniil. "You know, I'm here to talk to the Canes at the Crucible. Would you like to join me?" Daniil stares at him and just barely manages to keep from glaring. "You know that I do not." The other man lets out a deep, throaty chuckle. "I do not think the Canes hate you as much as you think they do." "I doubt that," Daniil replies. "Either way, I would rather not find out." Barak's expression changes then, and he eyes the doctor critically. "How are you feeling, Bachelor?" Daniil provides him with the standard response. "Fine." The answer does not seem to be enough for the surgeon. He hesitates before continuing. "Laura said that she visited you a few days ago, that you mentioned you might leave the town soon." "What, are you here to convince me to stay?" Daniil answers dryly. The man gives him another irritating smile. "There is certainly a place for you here, Oinon." Daniil has to stop himself from sighing. During the 12 days of endless suffering, the Canes had presented to him a wonderful possibility. The idea that the polyhedron, the structure that now lies in ruins across the river, could hold the soul of a person. Daniil had scarcely been able to believe it, but he had, and it was truly everything Daniil had dreamed of finding when he'd come to this small town. He had traveled here on the vague rumor of a man who had supposedly lived an extraordinarily long life in the hopes that he would be able to find something, anything, that would save his laboratory Thanatica from the powers that be that had been persecuting him and his colleagues. Instead, he had found that not only had such a person existed in the form of Simon Kane, his family had achieved the means for the man's immortality through the polyhedron. It had truly been a beautiful, fantastical dream. But, unfortunately, it had been that same dream that had caused the plague. The foundation for the structure had been buried deep under the town where the blood of centuries of bulls slaughtered by the kin in their sacred abattoir, both for commercial and religious reasons, had been pooling. As far as Daniil had been able to tell from the blueprints of the structure, that foundation had breached some sort of underground cavity that had been housing bacteria fostered by the bull blood and let it loose onto the city. So it was that when Commander Block had marched into town with this army and orders from the powers that be to stop the plague, Daniil had been tempted to tell the man to raise the city and save the polyhedron, the wonderful proof that man could achieve anything, even defying the laws of physics and death. Saving the polyhedron was what he had desperately wanted. It was certainly what the Canes had wanted, Maria Cana especially, and with the town destroyed and plowed into the earth, there would be no more plague. It would be eradicated. He had been on the verge of giving the commander the instruction, but he had also not been able to bring himself to do it. The town was sacred to the kin who were indigenous to the area. Parts like the abattoir were not replaceable to them. The city was old and anachronistic in a way that could not be recreated. Moreover, Daniil would be condemning the homes and livelihood of the few people who had managed to survive the plague. By contrast, the polyhedron was magnificent and impossible, but it was also new. It could, possibly, be rebuilt. It had been an incredibly difficult decision, the hardest Daniil will ever make. In the end, he had told the commander to destroy the polyhedron instead. The critical part of this is destroying the polyhedron had been Barak's plan for stopping the plague. With the structure destroyed, the breach letting loose the well of sandpest bacteria would be blocked. Additionally, with the sacrifice of the polyhedron, blood had poured from the polyhedron's ruined base, blood that Barak was apparently able to use to create more panacea. Daniil still does not understand exactly what is so magical about this blood, and he frankly suspects that, given the large amount of mysticism surrounding the kin, he does not want to know. All he does know is that when the polyhedron had tumbled down, the well of blood that had erupted from its broken base had flowed into the river for 3 days, after which Barak had told him the kin had fully accepted him as their true foreman and warden. At any rate, something about the fact that Daniil had chosen to follow Barak's plan instead of his own had put the idea into the man's head that they are friends now, actually. In the 2 or 3 additional weeks he has been here since the army left, time honestly seems to have no meaning here, Daniil has not been able to shake the man. Barak has managed to find him and check up on him almost daily, so his assurance that Daniil can stay here as long as he likes is not new. The truth of the matter is that Daniil does not want to stay. This town is horrible and violent, and constantly reminds him of the pain he felt over the worst week and a half of his life. But Daniil also has nowhere else to go at the moment. The powers that be had used him being away from his lab as an opportunity to destroy it. And without his lab, there is no real reason for Daniil to return to the capital. He is not particularly keen to go back to a place where he will only be known as a disgrace. Of course, on top of this is the fact that as a result of the 12 days of endless suffering, Daniil now knows the secret of this world. He is not real. No one in this town is real. Even the town itself is an illusion. Instead, they are all dolls experiencing a game played by the powers that be, in reality 2 capricious children, in a sandbox. With that in mind, none of this really matters at all. His research is completely meaningless, probably fictitious. He's mentioned this to Barak before as a way to get the other man to leave him alone, but he does not think the surgeon believes him. It probably would not even matter to the other man, bound as he is by love and duty to this town. But it matters to Daniil. And so when the surgeon tells him once again there is a place for him in this city, Daniil simply sighs and rubs at the bridge of his nose. When he does not give Barak a proper answer, the man continues, "The reason I'm meeting with the Canes is they have plans to rebuild the polyhedron, further away from the city this time so as to avoid risk of the plague. I'm working with the kin to find a suitable place in the steppe." "Good for the Canes," Daniil sullenly replies. "Are you sure that you do not want to come with me? I know how much you cared about the polyhedron," Barak presses. The sympathy in the other man's eyes is almost unbearable. "If it makes any difference," he continues slowly, "Maria should not be there. Just Georgi and Victor." "You mean Simon and Nina?" Daniil retorts. Barak sighs in response. "Perhaps," he says. "I still do not fully understand what is happening with the Canes and their predecessors. I've explained this to you before." "Yes, Oinon," Barak replies, his voice even and patient. "I understand the basics of it. The Canes have a focus at the Crucible that allows them to house the memory of a single deceased family member. It held Nina Cana, and the polyhedron was intended as a second focus for Simon Kane. But with the polyhedron destroyed and the focus at the crucible not large enough to contain Simon, Georgi has been holding the memory of Simon partially himself, and Victor has been doing the same for his deceased wife. You see, I was listening. Daniil begrudgingly admits to himself that this does seem to be the case. However, the other man adds, it is simply unclear to me the extent to which Georgi believes that he is housing the memory of his dead brother, and Victor the memory of his dead wife, as opposed to the two of them being overcome by grief for the deaths that they have not fully processed. I have spoken with both Simon and Nina. I assure you it is real enough, Daniil replies. In fact, Victor and Georgi might not even fully exist anymore, given the strain that channeling a person's memory apparently has on the mind. Daniil can see that Barak is thinking about adding more, but ultimately decides against it. Of course, is all the man says in reply. Well, I do not wish to keep the Canes waiting. Perhaps I will see you later in town. It is a question as much as a statement. Sure, Daniil mutters. The man nods in acknowledgement and heads back down the street towards the crucible. Daniil takes one more long look at the destruction he has wrought. Then, putting his hands in his coat pockets, he turns and walks the short distance to the next stop he usually visits on his self-flagellation tour. Daniil glances inside as he opens the heavy metal doors that lead into the cathedral, but as usual, it is empty. The building was only meant to resemble a cathedral, after all. It does not serve as an actual house of worship. Still, he closes the door as quietly as he can to climb the closely winding staircase to the loft comprising a ledge that surrounds the back 3 walls of the cathedral. It is the width of several people, but it has no railing, so Daniil is careful with his footing as he walks along it to the center of the ledge. He sits his back against the cool stone wall of the cathedral and closes his eyes as he waits. The silence that almost oppressively dominates the building is only broken by his breathing, slightly labored from the climb up. And then, unexpectedly, it is also interrupted by the sound of the large entry door. Daniil opens his eyes and frowns down as he watches the top portion of the door close, though from his position he cannot see the bottom or who has entered the cathedral, and he cannot be bothered to get up and look. The sound of regular footfalls follows the door's closing. They echo loudly in the large expanse of the building, and then they muffle as Daniil realizes that whoever it is now climbing the spiral staircase to his left. He rolls his eyes and moves to stand up. He does not particularly want to talk with anyone right now. At least, he does not want to talk to any of the living. However, Daniil is not fast enough. As he heads to exit via the opposite staircase, a voice calls, "Good evening, bachelor." Daniil stops, sighs, and turns to find a tall and lanky young woman walking along the ledge to approach him. "Hello, Yulia," he replies. Then he adds with mild curiosity, "Why are you here?" "Hoping to talk to you, of course. According to my predictions, it seemed you were due for a bout of self-loathing that would lead you here. I'm happy to see that I was correct." Daniil rubs at his eyes. Yulia always seems to know everything that is happening in the town at any given time, and anything that she does not know with the certainty she can calculate with a startling degree of accuracy. If one did not know better, one might assume her to be a clairvoyant, though she is not. No, that position is left to 3 of the town's other women whose talents Daniil had been highly skeptical of when he had arrived, but over the past few weeks has been begrudgingly forced to admit might hold a kernel of truth. "And why did you want to talk to me, Yulia?" Daniil responds. "Because I asked her to come," says a light voice behind him. Daniil turns to see Eva yawn, looking per usual as radiant as she had in life. Her golden hair glitters in the light shining through the building's high windows. "Hello, Eva," Daniil says quietly. "Hello, Daniil," she replies, smiling gently at him. Then she looks past him to the woman in the belted green trench coat. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Yulia replies. "Anything for you, Eva." Daniil turns back to the taller woman. "You know about Eva?" he asks with some surprise. Yes, this structure was built by the kings as another focus after all, she explains. It never worked because cathedrals are sanctified by the belief of those who worship in them, but given that this was built as a scientific experiment and not a house of God, the only one who ever truly cared about this building was Eva. It is only logical that her act of self-sacrifice finally lent this structure the spiritual energy to fulfill its intended purpose, and therefore preserve her soul in perpetuity. Right. Only Yulia would believe that to be the only logical conclusion. Daniil shifts and backs up a step so that he can see both women. Then what exactly did the two of you want to talk to me about? Eva glances hesitantly over at Yulia. We're worried about you, Daniil. To put it plainly, you seem to be spiraling out of control, Yulia adds in her typical no-nonsense tone that broaches no disagreement. She continues, You are a man who works with a sense of purpose, Bachelor. With the destruction of your laboratory, you now lack that purpose your soul desperately needs to anchor it. It has been over 2 weeks since the army left, and the only things you seem to do are eat, sleep, and visit locations that reinvigorate your guilt, such as the cathedral. I'm always happy to see you here, Eva adds quickly, but you seem to be getting worse, rather than getting better. In short, you need a project, my dear Bachelor. Something to keep you grounded, Yulia finishes. Daniil is almost wryly surprised that the two of them did not arrange to hang an intervention banner in the loft of the cathedral. And the two of you have such a proposal? He asks in resignation. The women both nod. We think you should open a medical clinic, Eva says. Daniil is about to reply that this is a terrible idea when Yulia holds up a hand to stop him. Before you protest, Yulia continues, I've already anticipated your rejections and prepared rebuttals to them. First, you will object that the town does not need you, because it already has both Artemi Barak and Stock Rubin. However, I would argue that Barak is now too busy with his duties as foreman to properly serve as a town doctor, and although Rubin is very skilled, Rubin was trained in the local ways of medicine. You, on the other hand, were trained academically. You possess knowledge that he lacks. You've forgotten Clara, Daniil adds, since she can allegedly heal people with her hands. Clara has her own talents, Yulia carefully replies, but they only reach so far. There are stories that her powers have a tendency to judge the worthiness of the recipient, and even the wicked deserve medical care. Besides, Clara was created by the earth as part of the plague. It is unclear if she will remain in this town or return to the earth now that the polyhedron is gone and the plague is under check. Daniil sighs. He tries to avoid thinking about Clara because nothing about the teenage girl makes sense. She is far too entrenched in the town's ungodly mysticism. Besides, she is also on the long list of people in this town who hate him. Before Daniil can say anything else, however, Yulia goes on, Secondly, you will protest that you are an academic and not a practicing physician. However, we both know that you are more than capable of acting as a doctor, and at any rate, our proposal includes opening this clinic with the help of Rubin, who has plenty of experience healing the people of this town. The man is nearly as untethered as you are these days, and after all, you will need a Manku if this venture is to work. Ah yes, a Manku, one of the locals authorized by the kin to cut into the bodies of the living and the dead. That had been a real sticking point for Daniil's research into what was causing the plague and how to stop it during the 12 days of endless suffering, given that he was an outsider and not, in fact, a Manku. Yet one more ridiculous facet of this ridiculous town. Fine, Daniil grumbles. Do I apparently have any other objections? I imagine that your third objection will be that there is no suitable place for such a clinic, and to that, even I believe you should open it here. Daniil frowns. Here, as in the cathedral. Of course, Yulia replies. The cathedral was built as a place to preserve life. What better location for a medical clinic? Daniil glances over the ledge to take in the dark stone of the building, the metal workings that adorn the walls. He glances over the floor of the building, which bears rows of pews formed from twisted iron and steel. Contrary to what Yulia says, it looks like a very unsuitable place for a clinic. However, as if reading his mind, Yulia adds, "We can clear the floor, build partitions to make examination rooms. It is all quite doable, I assure you." She looks over at him, and Daniil can see a spark in her eye as she forms the plans in her head. "Won't the Kanes object?" he asks. The tall woman casts him a wry smile. "The Kanes have paid little attention to this building since they realized it would be unsuitable for their purposes. I doubt that they will care what we do to it. Besides, the cathedral is as much Eva's now as it is theirs, and the idea to host a clinic here was hers." Daniil takes a step back and crosses his arms, looking between the two women once again. "It seems as though the two of you have thought of everything," he says wryly. "Do I even get a choice in the matter?" "Of course you have a choice, Daniil," Eva says gently. But Daniil glances over at Yulia, and her confident stance suggests to him that she already thinks it quite likely that he will agree. Daniil scowls slightly. Before coming to this town, he had researched death in the hopes of finding a solution to the condition. His life had been focused on fighting fate. However, no matter what he does in this town, no matter what he chooses, he seems to be following some line of inevitability or other. He supposes that this makes sense given that everyone here is, in reality, a toy in the hand of a child. But the thought of it still prickles at him. Eva must pick up on his irritation because she adds, "Please, at least think about it, will you?" Daniil looks over at her, to her soft eyes and gentle smile. Her plea is so kind and pure, and everything about her awakens every sense of guilt and duty that he has. He feels his indignancy soften somewhat. "Yes, of course," he tells her, and he can't help but smile as her eyes light up in approval. Chapter 2. The Scarlet Mistress. As Daniil leaves the cathedral, he thinks through this ludicrous plan. The cathedral is an awful place for a medical clinic. They would have to literally build smaller rooms inside of it. The building echoes, it would be a terrible place for patient privacy. Not to mention the fact that despite Yulia's confidence in him, Daniil knows much more about the theory of medicine than the actual practice of it. Even with Reuben, who is probably one of the few facets of the idea that he does not object to, given that he worked with the man to develop a vaccine to the sandpest and is already aware of his competence, Daniil knows that people tend to bristle at him. He does not have the nurturing nature that one wants in a physician. Yes, the whole affair is a terrible idea, and he should really just resign himself to returning to the capital already. These thoughts running through his head flee in terror, as Daniil steps out of the large stone building to find a slender, dark-haired woman facing him. She stands a few meters away, arms crossed, and her eyes flash when she sees him. Daniil lets the cathedral door shut behind him and sighs. Of course. Of course Maria Cana is here. He certainly hasn't had enough unwanted interactions for one day. "Hello, Daniil," she says, despite practically drizzling from her words. "Maria," he replies with some reluctance. "Look, I actually have somewhere to be, so Brock said that you were out here, and I'm surprised that you would come by the Crucible without paying respects to its mistress," she says, cutting him off. "As you can see, I was visiting the cathedral, not the Crucible," Daniil replies, keeping his tone as even as possible. It is not his fault that the cathedral is literally across the street from the Kane family grounds. "And I thought that Barack was meeting with Simon and Nina, not you." "My other business finished early. I decided to attend their little conference, given how important the rebuilding of the polyhedron is to me and my family." Of course. He can tell that she wants to draw him into an argument, and he does not have the energy for that at the moment. "Well, I sincerely apologize if I've slighted you, mistress," he says politely. "But, like I said, I have somewhere else." "Don't lie to me, Daniil. It doesn't become you. We both know that with your lab destroyed, you have absolutely nowhere else you need to be." Daniil lets out a long breath, though he can feel the irritation rising in his blood. "Maria," he says quietly, "can we please not do this here?" "Do what?" she responds, raising her voice. Talk about how you betrayed me. How you traded in the promise of our utopia just so you could preserve this pitiful town. Are you afraid that people will see what an absolute snake you are? Yes, because the people here liked me so well before that. Daniil finds himself snapping back. He should not do this. He should not engage with Maria. There is no version of this that ends well for either of them. But even as he thinks this, Maria answers, her voice filled with malice. It's all about you, Daniil, isn't it? All about you and your pride and how people perceive you. You are a doctor, and yet you lack basic compassion. How pitiful. Something in him snaps at that. You're right, Maria, he says coolly. It is all about me. That's why I spent the 12 days the plague was raging through town trying to set up quarantines and a hospital, trying to research a vaccine that would keep people safe. I performed the jobs that the town's leaders were too lazy or incompetent to perform themselves, and half the time I was frantically tracking down antibiotics to keep my own inevitable infection at bay. But yes, you're right, I did that all for myself. She lets out a long, low laugh. Please, Daniil, don't be trite. We both know you only took care of the town because the powers that be promised to preserve your lab, your precious Thanatica, if you did so. You would have left town on the first train out of here had Saburov not stopped you. Daniil swallows. There is, unfortunately, more truth in this than he would like to admit to her. Maria smiles cruelly at him as she continues. And yet the powers that be destroyed Thanatica anyways. Your efforts weren't enough for them, apparently, and why would they have been? You were the one that got Saburov emergency powers, and what did he do? He immediately abused them. Have you even considered how many innocent townspeople died because you trusted a man with the proclivity to shoot first and ask questions later? Daniil glares at her darkly. That is enough, Maria. Her smile widens. She holds up fingers as she starts ticking off the sins he is already more than aware of. And there's the fact of the isolation ward you set up in the cathedral, which was almost immediately infiltrated by a plague carrier, so everyone inside died. Then you were naive enough to believe Big Vlad when he told you that the termitary was uninfected, until it was far too late to save the dying people inside that structure as well. Daniil does not have to listen to this. He turns, taking the steps down from the cathedral, and heads to the street. However, Maria is nearly as tall as he is, and she keeps up easily as she follows him. I honestly don't even want to know how many people you killed with your own hands in the pursuit of stopping the plague, she calls over his shoulder. The doctor grits his teeth and speeds up, but it does not deter Maria from continuing. How many lives you justify taking in the pursuit of saving lives? So ironic. What a fantastic moral arbiter you are, Daniil. Daniil tries to shut her out as she adds, and, of course, then there's Eva. Daniil stops and whirls on Maria. You leave Eva out of this, he hisses to her. She grins and steps forward, a maniacal glint in her eye. Oh, yes, she says, her voice sultry and hateful. Who could ever forget what happened to your precious Eva? How she threw herself from the cathedral's balustrades in a desperate attempt to perform a miracle to save you from the Inquisitor? How she sacrificed herself for you? That is enough, Maria, Daniil says again, and he realizes from the startled looks from a few townspeople passing them on the street that he is shouting. He doesn't care. You've more than made your point, he continues. She takes another slow step towards him. Oh, my dear Daniil, I have only begun to make my point. Daniil tries with difficulty to keep his voice steady as he answers. What do you want from me, Maria? What do I want? Her voice twists and her eyes spark with hatred as she shouts. I wanted you, Daniil. You were supposed to be my champion, mine. Capella had Barak, Katerina had Clara, and I had you. You were supposed to pick me. There is real pain in her voice as she continues. We were supposed to build a new world, a new utopia. I saw it all in my mind. It would have been incredible. unlike anything the world had ever seen. Impossible buildings spiraling out across the land with the polyhedron in the center. People laughing and playing in the street. The end of the town's violence and pain. But you, my alleged champion, you threw it all away. And for what? I was just trying to do what I thought was best, Daniil shouts back. He tried not to, but the words had come out loud and forceful. I know, Maria. Believe me, I know. I failed you. I failed Eva. I failed everyone in this idiotic backwards town. I even failed my colleagues back at the Capitol, and I wasn't even there. Daniil tries to stop them, but he cannot stem the flow of guilt-ridden words. And I know that people died because of me. Don't you think I know that, Maria? You weren't in those plague districts when things turned really bad, but I was. The streets were filled with the dead and the dying soldiers burning the diseased right there in the open, and I left them to die because there was nothing I could do to save them. I spent days studying and researching and quarantining, and for what, you ask? For nothing! Barack came up with the cure, Ruben developed the vaccine, even Clara used her magic healing hand power nonsense to help the infected. And what did I do? Daniil feels his throat tighten, and he crosses his arms across his chest, as if to protect himself from his own words. I did nothing, he says more quietly, looking down at the ground. Absolutely nothing. Except destroy your dreams, apparently. Daniil cannot bring himself to meet Maria's eyes, and he turns away from her as he mutters, Now, like I said, I've somewhere I need to be. He walks down the street, pulling at the lapel of his coat, trying to ignore the eyes of passers-by glancing between him and Maria. Then, after a few moments, he hears the sound of quick steps. Wait, Daniil, Maria's voice follows. He stops, but he does not turn to face her. Daniil, she begins, but she hesitates. In the space, Daniil finishes for her. You what? You didn't know I actually cared? His voice feels raw from the tension still in his throat. Why do you think I decided to save the town, Maria? He feels fingers over his gloved hand, and Daniil slowly looks over to her. Her dark eyes are unreadable, though they no longer appear angry. Daniil cannot bear to be here any longer. I have to go, he says quietly. I have to. His mind casts around for an excuse, a reason. We're thinking about setting up a clinic in the cathedral, he says finally. I was going to talk with Ruben to see if he would help me. Daniil is still not sure this is a good idea, but by saying the words out loud, he supposes he is committed to them. Unless your family has any objections, of course, he adds. We can find another place if using the cathedral would upset the Canes. Maria casts him a long look. No, she says finally, her voice devoid of the fury that had inhabited it a few moments before. I can't see that we would. I'm glad to hear that. Daniil gently pulls his hand away from her fingers, and she makes no resistance against the movement. I have to go. Then Daniil turns, and again heads down the street to go speak with Ruben now, apparently. This time, and he is not entirely sure if it is to his relief or disappointment, Maria does not follow him. I know that's kind of a bummer place to end, but it's also a natural break in the story. Maybe if enough people watch this or write me comments about it, I'll record the next few chapters. In the increasingly bizarre landscape that is my YouTube channel. At any rate, before you go, I just want to say thank you for watching this video and my channel. I pushed myself to get this video out because August 22nd is the 1-year anniversary of my channel. If you don't mind me getting personal for a moment, I moved across the country in March of 2020, and I've spent most of the last year and a half stuck by myself in an apartment in a state in which I know basically no one because making friends is really hard during COVID, it turns out. I lost a job and then found a new job that I've been working at remotely since last year, and I'm now working on moving to the new state where my new job is in. I know it's been a really tough year for basically everyone, and I am certainly no exception. But one of the very few bright spots of 2020 and 2021 has been starting this YouTube channel and reading all of your kind and thoughtful comments and meeting just the coolest and most talented people through this whole endeavor. If you've watched one of my videos or left me a comment or said hi to me on Twitter or during one of my Twitch streams, thank you so much. You have all helped to make this last year bearable, and I am profoundly grateful. I still think one of the best things I've done with my YouTube channel is ask people during my incredibly silly Pathologic potluck video what they would bring to my Pathologic potluck party. Wow, that's a tongue twister, because every couple of weeks someone drops a new comment with a new item of food, and I love seeing these comments come in. So in that spirit, what is something you have to celebrate right now? Did you get a new puppy or kitten? Did you play a game that you really enjoyed? Did you write a fanfiction that you think is surprisingly good? Let me know in the comments. This has been a dark year for obvious reasons, and I want to spend just a moment to focus on the things that you too have to be grateful for. In the meantime, if you want to see more random, possibly video games related content from me, you know what buttons you need to press. I also want to plug that I helped my buddy Todoidoo of Last Minute Essays with a video on the Impressions game City Builders, so you should check that out, and subscribe to him if you want, you know, actual regular content. Unlike what you get from yours truly. We had a blast making it, and I think it shows, so give it a watch. And until next time, I know it's a tall order, but stay sane, Internet.